words of comfort or a warning to Iran? Condoleezza Rice says no military attack for now.
The question is simply not on the agenda at this point.
But on her first visit to Britain, she tells Iran it should take the diplomatic solutions that have been offered to it. Also tonight, dirty tricks. Labour admits trying to dig up Michael Howard's past. So are they all at it? Act tonight. Nelson Mandela's plea to the world's richest countries. And giving her all, an exclusive insight into how Ellen is really coping.
And in the Anglia region, the crackdown in Luton on rogue traders after an elderly man was conned out of his life savings for a garden full of rubble.
Good evening. It was a stark warning from the most powerful woman in the world. Iran, watch out. That was the message delivered in London today by US Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice. She met with Tony Blair and Foreign Secretary Jack Straw in Downing Street and warned that military action might not be on the agenda now, but it could be in the future. More now from our senior correspondent, James Mates.
Tonight, the new American Secretary of State is in the German capital, Berlin, part of a European tour that's designed to repair some of the damage done to transatlantic relations during the Iraq War. But even as she met Chancellor Schroeder, President Bush's rhetoric against another member of the axis of evil, Iran, was sowing the seeds of a new disagreement on foreign policy.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister, for welcoming me.
In London this morning, there had been plenty of warm language and friendly handshakes. But the unanswered question was just how far is George Bush planning to go to skewer Iran's nuclear ambitions?
Can you envisage circumstances during President Bush's second administration in which the United States would attack Iran?
The question is simply not on the agenda at this point in time. You know, we have diplomatic means to do this.
Note the words, "at this point in time." A highly reputable US journalist is reporting that these Iranian nuclear facilities have already been scouted by undercover US teams to help identify targets. With so much of the American military still tied down trying to suppress the insurgency in Iraq, a full-scale military invasion is most unlikely. But if Iran were about to go nuclear, no one would rule out the Bush administration taking action. But for the time being, the emphasis is on persuading Iran's mullahs to accept democratic reform. This morning, Jack Straw talked of the winds of change blowing through the East. Condoleezza Rice called it Freedom's March. This is what they're referring to: the successful post-war elections in Iraq and in Afghanistan, and the elections earlier this year in the Palestinian Authority and the former Soviet Republic of Ukraine. And Washington is quite clear that it wants both of Iraq's neighbors, Iran and Syria, to move in the same direction. Indeed, it expects them to, and may be prepared to act tough if they don't. On this one, though, America may be restrained by having no major allies, no coalition of the willing. For once, where America leads, Britain is unlikely to follow. James Mates, ITV News, at the Foreign Office.
Leaked memos, drug dealers, dirty tricks and politicians. It tells you for certain that there's an election looming. Tonight, Labour stands accused of launching a negative campaign against Michael Howard. A leaked memo reveals that Labour has asked activists to use the new Freedom of Information Act to find potentially damaging facts about the Conservative leader and then leak the stories to the media. Our political correspondent Angus Walker is in Westminster for us tonight. Angus.
Katie, I've seen the leaked internal document that makes it crystal clear that Labour wants to target Michael Howard himself. Labour Party strategists believe that the more the voters know about the Tory leader's past, the less likely they are to elect him as a future Prime Minister. But in fact, all the political parties are trawling through old records, trying to dig up dirt to fling at their opponents in what's becoming an increasingly dirty, phony war ahead of a general election. Another newspaper advertisement attacking Michael Howard, paid for by Labour, but no mention of government achievements and no mention of Tony Blair. And Labour now admits it's targeting Michael Howard personally, trawling through his past career using the Freedom of Information Act. Party officials hope to dig up damaging revelations. Among the questions they want asked, did the Tory leader help a criminal relative when he was Home Secretary? Did he fast-track a passport for Petronella Wyatt, the magazine journalist who had an affair with Boris Johnson?
It would be pretty odd if we didn't point out what Michael Howard and the Conservatives did in the past when they were in government and what they're now promising, because they've learnt no lessons, if they ever had that chance again.
But listen to what Tony Blair said back in 1997.
These Tories will throw everything at us. Right? They're going to attack me, they're going to attack you, they're negative, they're nasty, they're personalised.
Words from Mr Blair that seem to have been forgotten.
Do you know who said that in 97?
I'm sure you're just about to tell me.
Yeah, it was Tony Blair.
The Tory leader has hit back at what he calls a dirty tricks campaign.
I'm interested in the future, not the past. I thought the Labour Party were too, judging by their posters yesterday. But as usual, Mr Blair, what he says is all talk.
Earlier this week, Labour withdrew ads that portrayed Michael Howard and Shadow Chancellor Oliver Letwin as flying pigs. They were seen as anti-Semitic, as both men have Jewish roots. But the Tories admit they're also using the Freedom of Information Act to ask awkward questions about Labour's past record. And the Lib Dems are trying to unearth new material using the legislation which was designed to lift the veil of secrecy from government, not as a party political weapon. Angus Walker, ITV News.
Nelson Mandela has called for the complete cancellation of Africa's debt. The iconic statesman made the plea as he addressed the G7 meeting of the world's richest nations. It followed invitation from the Chancellor Gordon Brown, but his hopes of easing world debt were halted tonight after the United States said they would oppose any plans. From the meeting in central London, Harry Smith reports.
Gordon Brown brought in his most powerful ally, Nelson Mandela, to try to convince his G7 colleagues to back his plan. Before they all sat down for dinner, they had this heartfelt appeal.
I'm here to publicly share with you the outrage you wish to demonstrate, I believe, against that persistence of poverty amongst the masses of people all over the globe.
But even before his words had sunk in, the plan had been effectively scuppered by the man here on the left, US Treasury Under-Secretary John Taylor, who announced that the United States opposed the plan. For Gordon Brown, that is a damaging blow. He had hoped to make his plan for Africa a defining moment of his chancellorship. Mr Brown set out a raft of ambitious measures aimed at tackling world poverty. He's proposing 100% debt relief for the world's poorest countries. Britain paying 10% of debt-ridden countries' loan repayments, doubling debt aid to more than £50 billion a year. He says the cash for this will be raised by world governments issuing bonds. Gordon Brown says his plan is still on course.
Large numbers of countries are now supporting us. Now, we've still got a bit to go, but we are gradually winning support, and I'm hoping that my American and Japanese colleagues can look at the proposal this weekend and tell us what they can do to help us implement change to benefit the world's poor.
Gordon Brown can count on the support of Britain's European partners, but with Japan and Canada still to be convinced, he does need America's backing if his grand plan for Africa stands any chance of success. Harry Smith, ITV News at the G7 summit.
Some more of tonight's news now, and the government has failed to cut the number of children playing truant despite spending millions of pounds to combat it. 450,000 children miss classes every day in England, with 50,000 doing so without a valid reason, the same number as when Labour came to power. And alcohol kills as many people worldwide as smoking and high blood pressure, according to a report out today. It comes just days before the new laws allowing bars and pubs to remain open around the clock come into force. Tough action was promised by the UN Secretary-General Kofi Annan tonight. It follows the damning report into the Iraqi oil for food corruption scandal. He pledged that anyone at the UN, including himself, implicated in the allegations would be disciplined and face the courts if necessary. From Washington, Robert Moore has the latest.
We do not want this shadow to hang over the UN.
The Secretary-General is well aware this is a scandal that has the potential to undermine his leadership.
Good morning.
In truth, it was anything but a good morning for the UN, and Kofi Annan's first step has been to reassure the world he will act on the findings.
No, I think for an organization like the UN, any kind of any hint of corruption and misbehavior and that sort of disrespect for rules is harmful and is dangerous, and we cannot dismiss it, and we do take it seriously.
The commission into the oil for food scandal was led by this man, Paul Volcker, who has concluded senior UN officials made serious ethical blunders, although the depth and extent of the corruption remains unclear.
That's it.
The UN scheme was set up after the first Gulf War. The program involved Iraq selling oil and using the proceeds to pay for food and medicine. It raised $69 billion, but little of that money benefited Iraqis hit by sanctions. Instead, money found its way into Saddam's private bank accounts or was paid in bribes to companies involved in the program. So who are some of the UN players implicated? One key figure is Benon Sevan, who was the director of the Oil for Food program. The report accuses him of a grave conflict of interests. And then there's Boutros Ghali, the former UN Secretary General, who was in office at the time. He allegedly exploited a family connection and steered contracts towards favoured companies. Kofi Annan is also under the spotlight, as his son Kojo is being investigated over his involvement. It leaves the United Nations under real pressure, as critics now demand sweeping reform. And for Kofi Annan, there is no conclusion in sight. Paul Volcker has another report out this summer, and then there are 6 more congressional investigations underway here on Capitol Hill. For Republicans who love to hate the United Nations, it is all powerful ammunition. Robert Moore, ITV News, Washington.
There's much more to come here on the ITV News, including filling Johnny's shoes. Can this teenager help England reclaim Six Nations glory? And giving her all, the true state of Ellen's exhaustion as her race against time enters its final days. All that after the break. Welcome back. The number of people going bankrupt reached a record high today. A combination of credit card debts and higher mortgages forced more and more people to declare themselves broke. As Paul Davis reports for tonight's briefing, it's the latest sign that the interest rate rises imposed by the Bank of England are beginning to bite.
Katie, the amount of money we Britons owe on credit cards, loans and mortgages has now topped £1,000 billion. That figure has 12 noughts on the end of it. £1 trillion is another way of saying it. In context, the £1 trillion debt exceeds the whole external debt of Africa and South America. Today's UK figures show an alarming trend. Individual insolvencies rose by almost 28% last year. In the last 3 months alone, 13,000 people declared themselves bankrupt. Compare that to company insolvencies, down 11%, and it's clear it's personal debt that's driving people to bankruptcy. What's behind this? Well, partly borrowing on credit cards and partly our home ownership culture. With mortgages accounting for 80% of our debts, the recent interest rate rises haven't helped. There have been 5 rate rises in the last 14 months, and with rates now 4.75%, spending on mortgages is still growing. In November 2003, you were paying £625 a month on a £125,000 mortgage. Now you're paying £712. That's an additional £1,000 a year you have to find. And as repayments on mortgages, credit cards and loans rises, for many, personal bankruptcy is the only way out of spiralling debt. When debt overwhelms you and there's no other way out, you end up here at the Insolvency Service.
How much is owing on your credit card?
Admitting it all and being declared bankrupt. More and more people are resorting to this, but officials here say it's by no means an easy way out.
Bankruptcy certainly isn't an easy option. Bankruptcy has many consequences which people will find quite difficult. If they have assets, for example, they will be taken to be sold to help pay their creditors. If they can pay something towards their debt, we will ask them to pay something towards their debts, and that will go on for 3 years. Their bankruptcy will be advertised in a local paper and on our website.
Of course, debt isn't bad news for everyone. The economy thrives on people overspending and would be in worse shape if we were all more sensible. But an increasing number of people are finding they can't cope
and facing the shame of admitting their failure to the world. Katie.
Paul Davis there. There was a happier end to the week on the stock exchanges today. The FTSE 100 reached a 2.5-year high, in fact, closing up 33 points at 49.41. In New York, the Dow Jones finished up 123 points at 10,716. Now, for a roundup of tonight's sport, here's Steve Scott. Steve.
Katie, thanks. It's the tournament every rugby fan relishes. The Six Nations Championship kicks off this weekend, and it's promising to be the closest and the most exciting for years. France are the title holders. Ireland and England are likely to be their biggest rivals. The world champions are without their talisman, Johnny Wilkinson, for tomorrow's tricky opener away to Wales. From the Millennium Stadium in Cardiff, our sports editor Tim Ewart reports.
At Cardiff's imposing Millennium Stadium today, the men of Wales were warming up to face England and hoping the time has come to revive past glories. Are they good enough? The Englishman, who should be leading their opposition tomorrow, fears they are.
They're in form, they've got all the skills, they've got the pace, they've got the power.
Johnny Wilkinson, he's done it! Johnny Wilkinson, of course, hasn't pulled on an England shirt since the World Cup final in Australia 15 months ago. But as England try to recover from a continuing World Cup hangover, they've brought in a player who may himself develop that Wilkinson superstar status. Centre Matthew Tate, like Wilkinson, will be making his England debut as an 18-year-old.
I'm delighted. It's a dream for everyone to represent the country. Unfortunately for me, I've come sooner than I expected.
I think it's a tremendous work rate, great understanding and reading of the game.
Ireland believe this will be their year, and Scotland, they're being talked about as contenders for another wooden spoon, although their Australian coach is promising some surprises.
At training, they're so much better than they were before. Their attitude's better, their knowledge is better, their skills better, their fitness is better, and I know eventually they'll get winning, so I'm feeling really upbeat.
The Six Nations hardly needs added spice, but later this year the British Lions go to New Zealand. Competition for places on that tour may add some intensity to the matches that lie ahead now. Tim Ewart, ITV News, Cardiff.
South Africa's cricket captain Graham Smith hit a century tonight to help his side level the one-day series against England. It's now 1-1 after the home side won the third match of 7 by 3 wickets tonight. Now, we knew Ellen MacArthur's solo round-the-world record attempt was going to be tight for time, but tonight ITV News has been given an exclusive glimpse of the emotional toll Ellen is paying as she chases a place in history. Alex Thomas has more.
She spent more than 2 months at sea and always knew the closing stretch would be the hardest. But while on the surface Ellen MacArthur seems to be coping with every problem thrown at her, the reality is she's nearer the end of her tether than the finish line, as she revealed in an email to her support team shown exclusively to ITV News. Ellen wrote, "I doubt I shall ever be able to express what this trip has put me through. There have been some incredible moments, but there have also been those moments which are far too painful to bring back. This trip has taken pretty much all I have, every last drop and ounce. Ellen only has around 800 miles left to sail, and she has allowed herself to think of the end, if she gets there." Her email continued, "It has taken everything to get this far, and we are still not there yet. I have never attempted something as hard as this before. I want to tell you now that this will take a long time to recover from. Please note that there are no reserves and that I am pretty fragile right now." Ellen is still 2 days ahead of schedule, and if she can summon the strength, the record is hers for the taking. Alex Thomas, ITV News.
And that's the way it looks tonight. Don't forget, we'll have a full sports roundup tomorrow at 5:20. Katie.
Thanks, Steve. We'll be back shortly for an update on our headlines and a look at tomorrow's front pages. But now let's link up again with ITV newsrooms around the country. See you in a minute.
Good evening from Anglia News. First tonight, the growing threat of crime on your doorstep. Rogue traders are charging hundreds, even thousands of pounds for shoddy work. And as our consumer correspondent Claire McGlasson reports, their preferred victims are the frail and the vulnerable.
This wall cost £15,000. It's all that's left to show for a man's life savings after cowboy builders paid him a visit. Their workmanship put Sidney Bumstead in a residential home. He became increasingly confused by their demands for money. They repaid his trust by ripping up his front garden here in Luton, then removing his front steps so he couldn't get in and out of his own house.
I said to him what's happened, but he was so confused he didn't know. He was just sitting on the bottom of the stairs, freezing cold with the front door open. We found his bank book and we looked in it and we realised that over 4 or 5 visits they'd taken all his money and he's left with absolutely nothing.
Police say they are treating these cases as seriously as distraction burglaries.
Just because they knock on your door and offer you gardening one day, the next day they could be knocking on your door, entering your house, saying they're from the water board, and then a short while later you find that someone's stolen your wallet or your handbag.
But becoming increasingly bold, it's not just the elderly and vulnerable they target. This couple from Wisbeach had every reason to believe the builders who knocked on their door. They pretended to be from the same company that was working on a neighbour's house and even showed them a guarantee. But after taking the payment of £400, they left without leaving that guarantee or a receipt.
I checked with all the various people and I feel stupid that I have a cross that presumably a reasonably intelligent person can be tricked in that way.
So how do you know you're not missing out on a genuine deal? Well, the advice is never enter into negotiation on your front doorstep. If you do want or need some work to be done, make sure you get quotes from 3 companies before you sign up. And if you want to make extra checks, contact Trading Standards. They often have lists of approved traders.
What we do is we approve the traders by checking their criminal records, whether they've had any complaints about them, and then we also look for testimonials from people who've used them.